Hey everybody, and welcome to another video from Electronic Armory. In this video, we're going to continue our series on creating a full stack application from backend to front end with accompanying iOS and Android applications. This application will be the basis for our Learning Management System, or LMS, for the Armory. Today we'll customize the front end, which uses Angular 2 and Bootstrap 4, which are created in TypeScript and CSS or Sass, respectively. In our last video, I showed you how to start the applications and run them. In this video, since we'll be making changes, we'll want those changes to update the website without having to restart the server. So we're going to restart our JHipster application. To do that, we're going to first start our console service discovery and configuration software by running the docker compose command and have Docker run this in a Docker container. And so once that's up and running, we're going to switch over to our Armory folder, which, if you remember, contains our microservice backend. And for this one, we're going to run the local Gradle wrapper using Gradle and a W at the end. And we're going to have that up and running in the background. And instead of doing that same thing for the front end as we would normally do, we're going to run yarn start in order to run our front end application in development mode, so that we can edit files and have it directly edit the web page that we're viewing it in without having to refresh the browser. Any changes to the TypeScript, HTML, or Sass files will automatically get updated in the web browser without having to refresh the page. If you've never worked this way, you're truly missing out on some powerful developer features. Yarn is going to compile our application and serve up the necessary HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files. And once you have that up and running, it'll bring up our JHipster application in a web browser by itself. Now notice this port is not 8080, but instead it is 9000. Just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and show you how to edit the look and feel of this application. And I'm going to load this up in IntelliJ, my favorite IDE for Java. Now this application is loaded at the root directory, which is in the Electronic Armory folder. There's two folders in there that we created in the previous video, Armory and Gateway. Armory is the back end, Gateway is going to be the front end. You can separate this into two different IntelliJ projects if you want, but I just stuck it into one to make it easier to edit. So if we go into the Armory directory, we can see all of our files in here that make up the backend service. If we look at our Gateway folder, it looks very similar, but there are a couple key differences, and we'll go through each one in the Gateway application for this video. We'll touch upon the Armory later, because for the most part, our backend is running the way that we actually want it to. We've added our entities in the previous video, and that's all we need to do in order to get our application up and running. For our Gateway, we have a couple folders in here. The one that you're most interested in is going to be the source folder. And expanding that, we have a main folder within that, and then both a resources and a web app folder. Now this might be a little bit confusing to you at first, but inside our app folder, we have an account, an admin, blocks, entity, home, layouts, and shared folder. That doesn't really make a lot of sense if you have never worked in this format before, but this pertains to each section of our application. So for example, we have our home page, and inside of that, we have an HTML component. If I single click on that, nothing happens. If I double click on it, it opens it up in our editor. I don't like to double click on things, so let me show you a quick trick of IntelliJ. If we go up to this little gear menu, you can do auto scroll to source and auto scroll from source. Make sure those both are checked. And now when you switch to each file, it'll show up in your editor. And if you switch tabs, it'll highlight the file that you have selected. So in our HTML file for our home component, this is where the HTML is for our main home page. Now there's a couple interesting things in here, which is going to pertain to Angular specifically. Okay, so starting from kind of near the top here, we have this JHI translate attribute, and this attribute has a value of home.title. And inside of this node, this HTML node, we have welcome JavaHipster. Now this is going to actually translate our application using the variable home.title. We'll get to that in a second. But you can kind of go through here, customize your HTML, put in your HTML structure. Now if you want to change the text of things, you might be tempted to go in here and change the text to Electronic Armory, for instance. And then if I save that and then I go back to my application, you'll see that it's rebuilding here, but it didn't actually change my text. This is kind of interesting. This would be super frustrating if you're just coming to Angular and specifically Angular Translate. So let me show you how to actually change this code. Go back into our IDE and we're going to go down to the I18N folder in our application folder. and we're going to go to the English directory, expand that. We're going to scroll down until we see the home.json. This is going to be a container for all of the strings that are going to be localizable or translatable in our application. You can see right at the top we see welcome JHipster. So again, I'm going to change this to welcome to the Electronic Armory. Now I'm going to save that, quickly switch back to my application, and so when I do refresh this page, it comes up with welcome to the Electronic Armory. Things like the JSON file, those are already served up to your browser, so there's no way for your browser to go and fetch those. Now let's edit something different. Let's say this footer. Now this is kind of a boring footer, so let's go ahead and change it by adding a little bit of HTML of our own and a little bit of CSS styling. So if you remember, we go back to our app directory here, but it's not going to be in our home page. This home page is actually going to represent just this area here, including this image. So these components or these partials are kind of like fragments in Android or little sections of our application that we can place in at various places. So we also have a nav bar at the top, and that's going to be represented in layouts under navbar, and we have those same components in HTML, and so that's where we edit the navbar. We're not there yet, so let's find the footer and open up its HTML container. So you can see this is your footer, and again, if I change the text here, it won't actually change it in my application. I have to find this variable and change it there. And so if we go down to our I18N folder, we don't explicitly have a footer JSON file, but if you go into the global JSON file and search through here, you should find the footer variable. And here it is. So we're going to change this to, this is our footer. Hit save, go back to our application, and hit refresh, because again, that JSON file doesn't automatically refresh your web browser. And now it says this is our footer. So you can put it in whatever HTML you want here, but I wouldn't do it in the localization file. I would go up to the footer HTML component and totally revamp this as you see fit. So for instance, if we wanted to have an unordered list, and inside of that have some list items, and just say 1, and then put maybe another 1 in there for 2. Of course, we'd style that. But if I hit save and go back to my application, I didn't have to refresh the browser explicitly. Now this is great when you're editing CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. Okay, so this footer is still a little boring, doesn't really have any style, so let me show you how to do that. Okay, going back to our IDE, let's go ahead and close that I18 folder, open up content, and we have a folder called SCSS. This is our SAS directory. If I open that up, we have both a global SAS file and a vendor SAS file. If you go into the vendor SAS file, you can see it's importing some styles from our Node modules folder, namely Bootstrap and Font Awesome. These are two great libraries that we have included in JHipster. And we also have the ability to put our SAS variables in here. So for example, if we have a primary or brand palette for our website, we can put in color variables such as RGB values that represent the primary, secondary, and other colors that we have as part of our brand, so that we don't have to memorize or copy and paste the same RGB values throughout our CSS. This is one of the benefits of using SAS. Let's go down to our global SAS file, and we see a whole bunch of other styles in here that kind of override some of the other styles that we have in Bootstrap. Now what you can do is you can import your own file. We don't have a file currently in here. So let's go ahead and right click on this, go to new, create file, and I'm just going to call this custom.scss. And for the syntax highlighting, I'm going to scroll up to CSS. So we get the syntax highlighting for CSS, even though it's not a CSS file. Okay, so let me close some of these warnings here. And let's start our CSS file. Let's go into our footer component first to see that this is a class footer. So if you know your CSS, let's copy that class, go back into the custom SAS file, and since it's a class, we started with a dot and footer, and inside of this body of our CSS style, we're going to set the background color to, let's say, purple. Hit save, go back to our application. And notice that our footer has not changed yet. And that's because we haven't imported this new SAS file into our main application. And so in order to do that, we go to our global SAS file. And at the top, we simply import that custom file by doing @import, and then just the name of the file minus the SCSS. End it with a semicolon. Save that, switch back over to our application. and see that our background for that whole entire footer div has changed to purple. Now again, I didn't refresh the browser for that. So let's switch back to our IDE, go back into our custom SAS file, and let's change this to something like yellow, save. Our application is rebuilding. It injects that CSS, and we've customized our footer. All right, so I think you get the idea of how to customize our application, but let's go a little bit deeper and let's see how we can customize our application for a particular user role. So for example, if I'm logged in as the admin, I might want to show a particular div or some kind of button to the admin, but not the user. So to illustrate how that's done, let's go back to our IDE. Let's scroll up to our navbar folder, click on the navbar component HTML file, and this is going to contain all of the HTML for our navbar. Now, if you remember, our navbar has different options whether you're signed in as an admin or a user. So if you scroll down a little bit to find the admin section, or you can click on the window here, hit Command F, type in admin, and you can see all the admin sections here. So here is the translation variable that we're going to use for metrics, health, etc. So if you want to change any of these, you can go ahead and find this within the global file under the menu in admin and then the variable configuration. Now you might be asking why we type this in two places, namely the JSON file where this variable is located and then also in the HTML. Well, there's a little bit of a lag between when the application goes to the back end and gets that JSON file and when it displays this block. So it's going to display the HTML first, and so you want to have a placeholder there, namely the English, and then if you're in the German language, for example, it'll replace that text. It happens almost immediately, and especially if it's cached, it'll come up right away, but it's always a good idea to have a placeholder there in the first place. Now, if we scroll up a little bit to the top here, we can see that we have a JHI has authority, and we're asking the application if the user has the authority role admin. Let me go ahead and close this Finder window and hit escape to get rid of that. So, has authority role admin show what is ever in this containing list item, this entire thing all the way to the bottom of the closing element here for the list item. If you do not have the admin permission, it'll still be in the browser, but it won't be displayed to the user. So you don't want to necessarily put in anything that's super secret here. And if the user can find this information and say, click on a button or have it display as a user, the backend will enforce the authority not to perform that task. We have a little bit of security hanging around that, but do be wary that just because you're wrapping all this in a has authority doesn't mean that the user can't find it. However, as I mentioned, if they do try to commit any admin specific tasks, the backend will enforce that permission so that the user cannot perform that task. So keep that in mind. Okay, so that's the basics of customizing our JHipster application. Now, the other thing I want to show you is how to replace images. This is pretty easy and straightforward, as you may guess. We want to go into our IDE, and we're not going to necessarily replace the image in our HTML because that doesn't actually exist. So we go to a home component and we scroll up. There is no HTML that says include this image. Instead, it is in our CSS file, but it is not in our global CSS file because this image is not global. It is specific to our home component. And usually when we work with this type of application, we keep all of our components in the folder of that feature or that page. So in this case, it is our home component. And in our home folder, we have that HTML. We also have some TypeScript. And if you're familiar with TypeScript, you can see that this is our Angular application that deals with some of the elements of our homepage. So is authenticated, for example. We have the ability to log in and a couple other things that are built into this page. We also have modules for the different components, so such as the home route that sets up our routing. We also have a file specifically for that to set up perhaps the home page title, change this to a different variable, or change the value of that variable. And then finally, we have our home CSS file. And so you can see in here with our hipster class, which if you remember is part of this guy. So this div right here represents this image on the left-hand side here. So in order to change that, obviously there's no image representation here in the HTML, but instead it is part of this class. This is a bootstrap class to tell the image to resize fluidly. And then so if we go here and we resize this a little bit, you can see how that image scales up. Okay, so we want to replace this image with our own branding. And to do that, we're going to scroll down to our content folder inside of images. And now we have this JHipster guy here. And we also have a 2x version, which is really, really large, but it's going to be great for retina displays and high density displays like that. Now I have my own image that I'm going to drag into our images folder. So I'm just going to drag that in, and I'm going to say, yes, please copy that in. So this one's called Electronic Armory-logo.png, and as you can see, it's pretty large. We're going to go back to that SAS file, and instead of this location here, we're simply going to change hipster to our Electronic Armory-logo file. Make sure you type it correctly. And I'm going to highlight this, copy and paste it down here because this is going to be the 2x version. Really what I'd want to do is make a smaller version of this file and then put it here. So we have media queries here, and we're going to display a 2x version here under this media query. And so again, for high density pixel displays, we want to have a larger image for there. But again, for smaller screens such as mobile or just regular laptops or something like that. Okay, so once we've made those changes, we're going to save our SAS file. It's going to recompile our SAS file into CSS, inject that in the browser, refresh it automatically, and now we're well on our way to customizing our JHipster application. So good luck, and I can't wait to see what you guys produce. So if you like this video and want to see more videos in this series, make sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and head over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/Electronic Armory for more content. Also, be sure to head over to electronicarmory.com for additional topics on all things electronic. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.